Coleco does what Mattel-don't. Nintendo misfires with DragonQuest. And big money sees big future for the PlayStation 2. These stories and many more on this month's episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
What is up, man?
It's me, Mario.
Please save me.
Welcome back to another episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. I'm your host, Carl, and this is my co-host, Peter. Say hi, Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Yay! He got the joke again. Okay.
It's not like we're recording this for the second time.
No. We're definitely not recording this for the second time. So, do we have any news to report on in the little personal chit-chat that we're supposed to do at the beginning of a podcast, which seems to be ritualistic at this point?
Oh, well, I don't know whether I can talk about it publicly, so
yeah, well,
maybe next month.
We'll let it be next month.
Maybe
next month. Okay.
Maybe not.
I was supposed to mention a couple of small corrections that we got in from our wonderful listeners. And let's see. Last month we talked about what may have been Muse Software's first ad. And, of course, we got a correction that no, in fact, it was not, that the oldest found ad was in April of 1979.
Really?
Yes. So there was an ad before that in a publication, and I overlooked it when we were in the April episode, so that's my bad.
Yep.
Research
like
monkey done bad. Research monkey bad. No banana for me. So thank you, Ethan, of the history of how we play. And then we also got a correction from a longtime listener, Lawrence, who sent me some really cool emails about the history of HP's efforts in computers, or better said, their original lack of interest in computers when they were a measurement tool company. He sent me a really, really great scan of a letter from HP to a famous professor, F.E. Terman, who's widely considered the father of Silicon Valley, because he was the professor who got a lot of these companies to move to that area originally. And it's a letter from June 13th of 1956, where they said, "Dear Fred, I have no personal knowledge of computers, nor does anyone in our organization have any appreciable knowledge. Sorry we can't help you out in this regard." And that's William R. Hewlett himself writing this. It's really kind of a cool scanned letter. So, yeah, HP, one of the biggest names in computing later on, but originally tool company for measuring devices. And yeah, so that being said, those are our corrections for this month. Thank you, everybody. Keep those coming in. We are only human, and we do make mistakes. And as Alex Smith recently said, finding out the history of this industry is a group activity, and I'm paraphrasing there a bit. And so it takes a little bit of everybody contributing to make this all work. So, with that being said, I think it's time for us to start going down the rabbit hole. And as always, we look at the news from 40, 30, and 20 years ago. Now we're orienting ourselves on the cover dates of the publications that these news articles appeared in. And so obviously everything's going to be slightly delayed. So as we look to things from February, there are probably events that happened in September or maybe even earlier at times. But it gives us a nice baseline. And remember, send all your comments to us either on Twitter, we're at VideoGameNewsR2, or send us an email at VideoGameNewsroomTimeMachine@gmail.com. Links down in the description below. If you're on a podcast or something, always give us a like. And I'm throwing that in now because if you didn't listen all the way to the end, still give us a like. It helps us out, okay?
It doesn't cost you anything.
No, it doesn't cost you anything. But if you do want it to cost you something, we've got a Patreon account too. Links down below. And we're also on YouTube. You can give us a thumbs up there. So, yeah, it's all good. Okay?
Well, we're pretty widespread, man.
We are spread. Some might say too thin, but we are spread.
Yeah.
So, that's something kids say nowadays, right? I have no idea. Okay, so let's turn on the time machine and go back to February of 1980.
The interest in electronic games apparently
Personal computers that can swallow a book. 1980.
games people play.
Welcome to February of 1980. So, what are we starting off with?
Yeah, let's start slow. Gottlieb announces their System 80 pinball platform.
The new hardware is dubbed the Game with a Brain, which will allow, according to Gottlieb, Senior Vice President Bob Bloom, unprecedented gameplay variations and depth.
In pinball.
Classic tables like Black Hole and Mystery House will be released using this tech.
Well, this sounds promising. So, Did they deliver? Did they deliver unprecedented gameplay and variations and depth?
Actually, yes. Considering, well, it's like this. You have to look at it from the standpoint of pinball. Now, it's easy for a modern person who's not familiar with pinball to just say, well, okay, you bounce the ball back and forth and that's it. And in the traditional pinball vein, that was for the large part the game. You had a variety of different angles and types of shots to make, but before the solid state era, before you really built in microchips, you couldn't do specific combinations of moves to activate. So what these tables are starting to initiate, like Mystery House, for example, is an absolutely phenomenal table. I've only gotten to play a physical version once, but it is an amazing table. It had in the middle of the table a receded area covered by clear plastic, and underneath it was a second miniature pinball table with a small, I believe it was a smaller ball, I may be wrong on my memory, but it had a different angle, so it actually looked like you were playing in the other direction. So normally your flippers are at the bottom and the whole angle is upward, heading out upward from you. Well, this one had the opposite angle, so suddenly when you activated the Mystery House and you went inside the Mystery House into this miniature table in the middle, now you were playing with the flippers pointing towards you as opposed to pointing away from you.
Well, that's hella confusing.
It's hella confusing, but the way you activated this was by having to get certain scores or hit certain targets in certain orders. And that had to be controlled by the flippers. So before it would be, well, once you get these three knocked down, no matter when it happens in the game, you've knocked those three down. Now you can set timers. You can say, oh, now you need to do A, C, and D. But the next time around, it's going to be B, C, and E. And so by changing this up, what you're really doing is adding a massive new level of skill required to play the game, because it's no longer just enough to, at some point, get it there. It's now, can I really make this shot in these few seconds? Can I plan out where the ball is going to bounce next to get to that angle that I need? And this really adds a tremendous amount of depth to the point where the games we have nowadays really are all just an extension of this, where modern pinball games rely on this to constantly be telling a different story. Well, then later on, we'll see the digital pixel style displays come later on in the 90s, and what they do is they start telling you a story. So suddenly you've got the same dozen or so targets on the table, but by putting them in different contexts with a different story, suddenly they're telling you you're doing something else, and you really feel like you're getting into a plot sometimes on some of these tables.
Okay. Well, this sounds pretty interesting. Did it change anything about the price of a game?
Well, the prices of games are going to be a slightly different topic, but we're going to get to that. At this point, they're still charging 25 cents, despite inflation flooding the country. But as Gottlieb is getting deeper into pinball with electronics, something else is going on.
Atari abandons pinball.
Yep. After putting a lot of effort into promoting their line of pinball tables, Atari throws in the towel with their Hercules table. The clearest sign of this, while just a few months back they were putting pinball tables front and center on the cover of their Coin Connection newsletter for arcade operators, this month, beside the headline that Asteroids is the biggest hit ever, they have an article titled, "Operators Tell Us. Root operators report stronger video performance compared to pinball."
So they did something utterly unexpected and tried out something new.
Well, I mean, Atari was always trying something new. Remember, they're the ones who are basically inventing this industry. But yes.
Okay, let me rephrase it. So they were trying something utterly unexpected and trying something new.
Well, they wanted to get into the pinball area because pinball was still a huge, huge moneymaker.
Yeah, sure.
And unfortunately, they didn't have the competence for it. Even with a big license like their Superman table. And remember, this was right around the same time that the Superman movie came out, which was one of the biggest movies ever. Yeah, that wasn't a weird cut there because we had to take a phone call. Okay, now. So Atari's out of the pinball game. And they, like I said, they wasted no time immediately talking pinball down because they're out of it. So this Gottlieb is pushing for more pinball. Atari has decided they are a video game company.
You know, what I really don't get is why don't they just create a division of Atari doing pinball? Atari
well, they did.
Pinball.
They did have an Atari pinball division,
right? So
and
why
they just shuttered it.
Yeah, this is what
they
I don't
closed
get.
it.
Why did they do it? Why?
Because they weren't competitive. They didn't have. I mean, designing a pinball table is not that easy, especially one that's going to be a lot of fun and good. Mm-hmm. And they just didn't seem to have that organization down. They didn't have the manufacturing. And as the VCS is now going to become a more and more important part of the company, porting your arcade games to the home is not something you can do with pinball.
Right.
So, yeah, it just didn't fit with their model.
Okay. They were basically just shutting it down because they were bad at it.
They were bad at it, and they couldn't compete, and there was no point in continuing for no reason. So,
That's true.
Atari's out. And now that we're transitioning to the arcade industry, what else do we know?
Yeah, Sega and Gremlin continue their push for multi-game cartridges. Cabinets. Sorry.
No problem.
I misspoke.
No problem. After introducing mini video at the AMOA show, a miniature-sized cabinet with interchangeable game boards, they are now introducing a combo cabinet that plays both head-on 2 and Invinco.
Okay, so it just went to the cabinet and pushed the head-on 2 or the Invinco button, and you can then just play one of them?
I'm not sure if it was a button, but yeah, it was basically that setup. And people who are familiar with things like the Neo Geo cabinets, Neo Geo worked on a similar setup where you would have 4 or 6 different games in one cabinet. They were basically these really large cartridges. It was a PCB in a cartridge format. And you would have a little digital display at the bottom that gave you the number of the game you were choosing.
Okay.
And you would just click that through until you got to the game you wanted, and then you hit start, and then you would be playing that game.
So the player decided, or not the arcade owner?
Not the arcade owner. So the arcade owner could simultaneously have multiple games in one space.
That's pretty cool.
It's actually was a great idea, and it worked for Neo Geo. Now, the only way that works is if you're using the same hardware for each of the games.
Yes.
And so this is, at this point in time, it may be a little premature because the hardware is changing so fast and it's evolving so quickly that to create a platform that you're going to amortize the cost, let's say, over a year or two, with new games being added as the old ones get old, doesn't really make a lot of sense because the technology is changing so fast.
Yeah.
But we will see this model of the standard board with interchangeable games really take off in a few years. And Sega is at the forefront of that trend. You can see they keep trying to do it. Atari's not even thinking about this at this point. But Sega is. And that makes it a very interesting idea.
I mean, Atari is surely more occupied with abandoning pinball, so...
Abandoning pinball and selling as many asteroid cabinets as they can get their hands on. Yes. So, okay. And speaking about developments in the arcade...
Yes, Gary Stern calls for changes to deal with inflation.
Now, the inflation of the 1970s is hitting the manufacturers of coin-op games, and Gary Stern of Stern Electronics has written an open letter published in Replay magazine addressing his concerns. The high cost of materials, especially precious metals needed for even more complex solid-state pinball tables, and increased labor costs due to higher costs of living are going to require adjustments to the price of games and the behavior of operators, according to Stern. Without an acceptance of higher per-play prices, the higher costs of games will not be payable, limiting the ability of manufacturers to continue to turn a profit on their machines.
Well, first of all, applause for your monologue.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
And second, by the time a game was a quarter.
At this time, everything in the American arcades is a quarter.
A quarter.
A quarter a game. Now, that is, of course, set out because, well, it's the largest denomination coin in mass circulation in the U.S.
Yes.
There are, of course, silver dollar coins, which are very popular in places like Las Vegas, but they aren't really in wide distribution anyplace else in the country. And so this quarter, this use of a 25-cent piece is great. Now, the problem is, if you wanted to up the cost, you have a couple of choices. You can try to go to 35-cent play, where you have to throw in a quarter and a dime. But now you're making it more difficult for the player. You're adding an extra barrier. Well, do I have the right change? You know, 1 quarter, it's 1 coin, fine. As soon as you have to start mixing and matching the coins, you start to get into trouble.
Well, and can you just buy chips or something?
Well, and this would work except for the fact that, remember, arcades are not, they're prevalent, but they're not the entire business. You also have arcade cabinets showing up at convenience stores, arcade cabinets in bars, arcade cabinets in all these other places where there's one machine where you wouldn't necessarily have a change machine for 1 or 2 cabinets.
Okay.
So for the operators who are putting these cabinets all over the place, that is still an important market that they cannot abandon.
Okay. And the technology by the time wasn't as advanced, so that you can put like a little machine on the cabinet where you put in $1 and it gives you like 3 coiny thingies.
Well, you could do that, but you wouldn't have it in the arcade cabinet itself. It would be someplace next to it.
Well, you can just put it on the arcade cabinet, and the coins that come out of it, they go back in when you pop it in.
Oh, those machines, I don't know if they existed already in 1980, but they are prevalent in all the arcades.
Yeah.
But that doesn't solve your problem if you're putting one standalone machine in a convenience store or at a gas station.
Well, it does when the thing that changes your dollar bill to like 3 coins is attached to the machine. Well, but obviously they didn't do it.
That has to be a fairly large machine because you remember you're going to have to put a lot of coins and everything else in there. That all takes up physical space. In a convenience store, you do not want to be every inch of that convenience store has to be turning a profit.
Okay.
So taking up almost the same floor space as the arcade cabinet itself is not an option.
Okay.
Yeah. And so he's actually calling for either a move to 50 cents.
So 2 quarters?
2 quarters of play.
Pretty much
well,
of an increase.
This is a massive increase, and this is why everybody was loath to do it.
Yeah.
And it will not happen until Dragon's Lair hits in 1983.
Okay.
And Dragon's Lair could do it because it was a Laserdisc based game. It looked like a cartoon. It was such a amusement park ride style experience.
Yeah, you have to add some value.
That asking 50 cents to play this didn't seem outlandish.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Stern sees this. Now, the mass inflation of the 70s is not going to go with us into the 80s. Mm-hmm. So this problem that he sees, and everybody's afraid of this inflation continuing, it's going to be stymied by 1981, end of 1980, beginning of 1981. Mm-hmm. But until then, it's a major concern, and there's even some lobbying efforts to try to get maybe a 50-cent piece out into circulation, or to increase production of the $1 coins. And that just never really takes off in the States. There's always this, if we do that, we're devaluing the dollar. If it looks like a coin, it doesn't have the same value, and people might lose confidence in the currency.
And this was a time when people used to pay cash, right?
Well, of course, everything's cash because you don't really have the digital infrastructure or the telecommunication infrastructure to do a large quantity of payments. Now, we talked a few months ago about arcades accepting credit cards. Mm-hmm. And that is something that can be done, but it's only going to be done if you're planning on going in there and buying $20 worth of quarters. It's not going to pay off if you're coming in to play 2 rounds of Asteroids and then leave again. And so that's why it's still something that has very limited usability and really won't take off until really the 2000s, when we have Dave & Buster's and GameWorks and other companies exchanging the coin collector with a card swiper.
Okay.
But then you're not using a credit card, you're using an internal card that you pre-loaded with money.
Well, this is pretty nice, so you won't forget how much you already spent.
Exactly, yeah, that too. So, okay, now let's leave the arcades and see what's going on at retail.
Yeah, speaking about spending. Holiday sales strong after slow start. Way too many ads.
Yeah, exactly. While we had heard much rumbling of a sluggish Christmas season, sales seem to have picked up dramatically right before the holidays, with electronic games being the big seller. Everything from Mattel football, Simon, Coleco, baseball, and Atari's Touch Me sold well, or sort of. Now, these more expensive items pushed down sales of traditional toys. In 1978, electronics appeared to add new customers to the toy store mix, increasing overall sales, but in 79 it just ate up sales that would have gone to more traditional boy toy products. Not a blowout Christmas, but not the disaster many had feared.
Well, it makes sense to sell games that are aimed at a target audience, at families where they only have one child.
Well, this is less the one child thing. Now, some of the magazine articles I was leafing through for this talked about how the video games had brought in what toy retailers called the lost generation. Okay. And what they meant by lost generation was that their customers were the little kids up until about the age of 13, 14. Mm-hmm. Then they stopped going into the toy store, and they didn't see those kids again until the kids became parents in their mid-20s. So there was about a 10, 15-year period where these people just didn't come into the toy store.
Oh, okay.
And the electronic games were starting to bring them back in. And in 78, they actually had that effect where they sold their normal toys, but in addition, they also had this lost generation come in and buy toys.
So what did you do when you were an American in 1978 and you were 14?
You bought sporting equipment, and
so
you went out. You actually moved around. You weren't a lard ass like me. Things like that. Yes. It was that different time. You were busy mowing lawns or whatever to try to get some money so you could go out on dates. You
had social interaction.
You had social interaction. Imagine that. Yes.
So they really caught the lost generation, man.
Yeah. They pulled him back in. I mean, come on. It's it's a sea change. The idea of the teenager who still plays with toys is basically, you could say born here at this moment in time. And we get to the point today where, we're recording in front of a giant pile of toys that I have around my workspace.
But they're just for display. It's like decoration.
Yeah, they're just for display. Just don't look at the non-existent
and they move like every week.
dust patterns. Yeah. No. They're just for display. But still, it's one of those situations where we are seeing that video games are not going to be limited to just a child's product. And that is important. That is really, really hugely important, because it means that this is a market that has room to grow. But the toy retailers, who are the ones still selling, especially these handheld devices. Remember, the toy sellers are not usually the ones selling an Atari VCS.
No.
That's too expensive for them. They don't really know how to place it in and it's also too risky. Yeah. But these electronic games are perfect for the toy sellers, and they're thinking to themselves, okay, maybe this is a fad, whatever, but they don't see, and this is one thing that never showed up in the articles that I read. They never talk about the VCS, they never talk about consoles, and they never talk about people moving away from the handheld electronics to that big brother game system. And that's going to bite a lot of them in the butt, especially the smaller retailers who can't afford to take a bath on $30 and $40 game cartridges. Okay, that is really going to be what makes and breaks this, and where giant companies like Toys R Us, which are just now really gaining steam, are going to make a difference. Because Toys R Us is really going to get into that video game space and become the biggest retailer for games.
Oh.
Very quickly. Now, it's not happened yet, but it's coming.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's going, considering the news of, what was it, like last year?
Toys R Us went under. Toys R Us is no longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Toys R Us is gone, but yes, it's going to take another 40 years for that to happen.
Yeah.
So, moving on.
Moving on and back to Atari. Atari blasts the airwaves.
Atari is boasting that their massive Christmas season TV ad campaign hit more than 93% of households in the U.S., with more than 1 billion impressions against adults 18 and over. The ads ran on such top-rated shows as Charlie's Angels, Dukes of Hazzard, Monday Night Football, and The Tonight Show. Yep.
And how did they measure that they caught like 93% of households?
Well, in this kind of case, all you'd have to say is, okay, which stations did we run the ads on?
Yeah.
And given the radio frequencies move or go out from a central point, from the tower, what percentage of the country was not covered?
Oh.
Yeah.
So they assumed that everyone was watching TV.
Well, no. That's not what I said. I said it went out. It hit more than 93% of the households. Whether or not the households actually turned on the TV at the right time is another issue entirely.
It hit the household.
Yeah, but you can't. But we are talking about a who's who, the top-rated shows in the country at the time, especially the shows that were going to appeal to that. You know, we're not talking, they're not advertising on some science show on PBS. They're advertising on Monday Night Football, great for your sports games. Dukes of Hazzard, great for your action games. Charlie's Angels, great for your general teenage audience, male teenage audience. So, and the fact that they advertise on The Tonight Show is kind of cool, because that's late at night, it's not appealing to the kids. They're seem to be targeting a slightly older audience, or at least the parents. Yeah.
So do you have any sales figures of after this massive ad campaign?
Not yet. I haven't seen anything in the publications that we've been looking at, and I may try to dig into some yearly reports for Atari later on if I can get my hands on them. But it's something that with the massive, right now I basically go through about 30 publications every month for this show, and it's getting a little overwhelming. I need to figure out how to pare some of that down, but at the same time, there's always something interesting in there. So until I get my hands on the Atari annual reports for these years, we'll just have to wait it out.
We will certainly wait it out.
Yes. But speaking of corporate news...
Yes, Michael Katz moves from Mattel to Coleco.
Having led Mattel's efforts in the handheld gaming arena, Michael Katz has now moved over to their rival, Coleco, the second stop in a very illustrious career in the industry.
So what was the first stop?
Well, the first stop was Mattel. So he starts out at one of the largest toy makers, and he's the one running their electronics division, their handheld electronics division. And we talked about Katz just last month because 10 years later, he moves over to Sega. And he is the one who introduces their first big successful campaign, Sega Does What Nintendo Don't. He's the architect, really, of that.
This is a really innovative marketing strategy.
It was really innovative, but it may have had a precedent that Mr. Katz was involved with himself.
Really?
Yes.
Coleco dares to compare.
Yes, Coleco launched their now famous handheld football comparison video in December, in which two actors, dressed as Coleco and Mattel's respective handheld football games, compare one another's features. This confrontational approach wasn't just limited to the airwaves, as Mattel had also sued Coleco over patent infringement.
So they basically stole Mattel's handheld.
Well, I don't know how the case went out, but I mean, the idea was you've got LED technology, little red dots. You've got a football field represented on the screen, and you've got buttons to control them. Now, if that's your patent, yes. But then you would also have basically a patent on the entire concept of
handheld games,
or handhelds or representations of football. Now, the actual patent, Mattel's patent, was to cover electronic games that involved a collision detection on LED-powered displays.
Wow.
Now, that collision detection is the important part because they're using electronics to show that two things have clashed. And that is actually something that is theoretically patentable. We would see that later on with Activision getting sued by Atari, and Activision also getting sued by the creators of the Odyssey, Philips Magnavox, for violation of the patents on essentially the same idea, collision detection, but there it was on consoles and console games. Now,
so didn't we earlier have, when was it last year? I can't really remember. Didn't we have a case where two fighting games were involved?
Yes, that was the case of it was Karate Champ versus International Karate. Or World Karate Champ, as it was called in the States. And there the idea was the simulation of that. But see, there you're talking about an idea, not a patent, because a patent is about a method of doing something.
Right.
And here they're talking about having two LED lights collide.
Okay.
And it's detecting that they have collided.
It's
for the purpose of
mechanism.
It's the detection mechanism that is being patented here. And so Coleco wouldn't be the only company sued, as Mattel would also add many retailers and, in the coming months, a variety of other manufacturers to the suit, including Hong Kong's Konica. To scare off any future imitators, Mattel has taken out whole-page ads in trade magazines warning of the lawsuit.
We are coming for you.
Basically. Konica responded a few months later by taking out an ad in the Wall Street Journal promising to indemnify retailers of any damages arising from Mattel's suit to encourage them to continue to sell their games.
Well, this is rather interesting. So how did it turn out? Did Mattel win the case?
As far as I can tell, there's no decision in the case. If any kind of payment was made outside of court, that's one thing. But what we're going to see is that this handheld market fizzles out really fast. So I think what ended up happening is if they did pay something to Mattel for the infringement, and I honestly would have to look it up again, but I don't think there's actually any result from this. But it wasn't going to matter because by the time this would have gone to court, we would have already been onto consoles, and these handheld games were basically already. And after a quick little search on the internet, no, I can't find that the case actually went to trial. So we're just going to assume it got dropped because it was crap. And yeah, that's basically it.
Well, if you have any knowledge about it, let us know.
Oh yeah, definitely. If anybody can confirm or deny it, please drop us a line. Because I seem to have missed looking that up, and as a lawyer, that really kind of sucks that I didn't do that. But it's all good. So, what else have we got? What's our next story?
Tiger Electronics goes solo.
Tiger Electronics Toys, previously a division of Interstate Industries Incorporated, has been spun off into its own company in light of the burgeoning handheld electronic game industry. The company, of course, would ultimately become Tiger Electronics, makers of countless, quite pointless, but somehow still fun to play for a few minutes electronic LCD games.
I do not know them at all.
Oh, really?
I think.
Oh, this was the bane of many a child's existence in the 90s, 80s and 90s. Tiger was...
In America.
Well, not just. What Tiger would do is they would license all sorts of games and movies and other properties and make these really quite terrible and limited old school LCD games. You know, the kind where you've got this single black shapes that turn on and off depending on what you're doing. I mean, You've never really seen this. Okay, for all of our listeners who may be familiar with Tiger Electronics, I'm going to now pause the video and show Peter several Tiger Electronics video game systems, and then when we come back, he'll give you his reaction.
Hold on.
And we're back. So, what do you think, Peter?
My mind is blown. I need one of them right now.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay.
Yeah, they're really bad.
Yeah, they're really, really bad.
Even for the time.
Well, Tiger is going to go on to great, great things, including their attempted virtual reality, which was basically just a Tiger game that hung right in front of your eyeball.
Not bad, not bad. They
bad,
stood true
bad.
to
It was just bad.
At least they were true to themselves, so...
Something like that.
Yeah.
So this is the beginning of Tiger Electronics. Now, moving away from the console, from the handheld market, what's going on in the world of computers?
IBM introduces the 5120.
IBM enters the microcomputer market, as was rumored back in our December episode. The IBM 5120 was an integrated machine with a monitor and 2 drives, which, depending on the configuration, would cost anywhere from $9,000 to $25,000.
Which is a catch, and like 50,000 in today's dollars.
At least 50,000. You got to go a little bit higher, even. I mean, you're going to have to go with a 3-fold price adjustment.
Also here, there was no cut.
No cut whatsoever, no. So yeah, this is an extremely expensive piece of kit that they've introduced. And by doing so, in no way a competitor to the existing microcomputer market.
Right. Did actually anyone buy this piece of technology?
Oh yeah, I mean the 5120 was actually around for a few years as a standard, and you could get it with a bunch of different assets and so forth, and it did have a bunch of productivity software, but it didn't set the world on fire, because if you were spending that much money, you probably also had some kind of larger terminal someplace else in the building.
Yeah.
And this was really, I don't really understand what their strategy was with this device. But hey, it's IBM. They're not looking at the consumer market. They are simply looking at the large industrial market. Yeah. And for that purpose, I guess it's okay, because as the old saying goes, nobody was ever fired for buying an IBM. That was actually a phrase in business that you could buy from somebody else, but you might get fired for doing that. But nobody was ever fired for buying IBM.
Ah, okay. Because no one knew their shit, and it must be IBM's.
There you go, yeah.
All right. Moving on, New York Times profiles new trend in the publishing business.
The mainstream seems to be realizing that software is on the rise. The New York Times article talks about the rise of the software publisher, similar to traditional book publishing, with individual creators creating works either on their own or financed through publisher advances. This, of course, wouldn't last long as teams grew. But it does show that this business model is coming.
Yeah.
And the New York Times is doing what I guess you would do normally. They're putting in the same perspective as publishers of books.
Okay. So compared to something they already know.
Exactly.
Sure.
So, I mean, the idea of a book publisher, well, an author wrote the book, but the author isn't going to be the one who designs the cover artwork.
Yeah.
It's not going to be the one who designs the layout. Isn't going to be the one who designs the advertising campaign and so on and so forth around it. That's going to be the publisher's job. Now, as we're going to see in a few years, suddenly you're not going to be able to make a software program with one person or even two people. It's going to be larger and larger groups.
Yeah.
And so the publisher is going to take on a different role than you see as book publishing.
Right. But back in the day, surely this was pretty comparable.
Oh, very comparable. Very, very. And the fact that this article, and of course, everything we're talking about here, there's going to be links to it down below. This is a very cool sort of, first step of them realizing, wait, not only is this here, but this is big enough that companies want to distribute and mass distribute this. And it's showing that we're hitting a critical mass on installed computers in homes, because the publishers wouldn't just be able to make money off of the business crowd. So, it's pretty cool. And our final story, speaking of publishers.
Yes, Broderbund is founded.
Brothers Doug and Gary Carlston established Broderbund to sell 2 strategy games created by Doug. After a rocky start, it becomes one of the largest and most profitable computer game publishers of the 1980s. And do have to give a big shout out to They Create Worlds, fellow podcast. They posted this on their Twitter feed. They've been doing a great little series of Today in History style tweets every month, and this was one of them, and I had completely overlooked it. Obviously, this didn't hit the newsstands at any point, but we will see Broderbund ads in a few months popping up in places. And Broderbund is, of course, a massive company that gives us Carmen Sandiego and the Prince of Persia, in addition to the print shop, which was massively influential piece of software. So no, Broderbund, very, very important company in the development of the industry. And they get their start here right at the beginning of the 80s. So, any questions?
Not yet.
Excellent.
Let's move on.
Turn on the time machine and let's jump forward to February of 1990.
A wonderful month in a wonderful year. Many great people were born back then.
Are you trying to hint at something that I may have forgotten somebody's birthday? Because I didn't get an invitation to a party, so guess what?
You're good.
Okay. Time machine on.
Today we have a ton of tips for some of the hottest people around.
Mario Brothers 3.
You can't do that on an 8-bit system.
Welcome to February of 1990. Let's jump right into it.
Yes, Kasparov beats Deep Thought, hereby defining the meaning of 42.
Something like that, yeah. Now, back in October, so news, remember, we're just doing when it shows up in the press, but back in October, chess master Garry Kasparov defeated IBM's Deep Thought handily in a 2-game match, after the computer had beaten several other top chess players. Its successor computer, Deep Blue, would finally beat Kasparov in 1997. And I mean, I remember this. This was huge headlines in the news when I was a kid. It was like, "Oh, cool! They're gonna go at it. And computer's gonna beat Kasparov." And then he handily beat him. And it was like, okay, this is not an issue. And it would take another 7 years before they finally had a computer that could beat the world champ.
Interestingly, I remember this bit of news that a computer firstly beat a world champ in chess.
Did you remember this?
Somehow it's in my head. I don't really know why, but somehow it's in my head.
It was huge. I mean, this was basically, oh my God, Skynet is real.
I didn't have this connection.
Sort of, yeah.
But still, I really thought it was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was huge news. So that's our big general topic. Let's get into some less intellectually stimulating or sophisticated news.
This is rather sophisticated, foreshadowing the future. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are coming.
Well, the Turtle Mania is hit. UK magazine Ace gives a brief update on the newest fad sweeping North America. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, a TV and toy phenomenon in the US, they have also taken to games with an arcade game as well as an NES, Amiga, DOS, and C64 title in North America. Ace asks, when will it hit Europe? Only time will tell.
So, what did time tell?
Well, time told us that they would not be called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles when they arrived in Europe, because ninja was seen by the UK censors at the time as something dangerous, and so they had to change it to Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles.
Really?
Yeah. Actually, it was called Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles in Europe.
All over Europe?
All over Europe, just because it was easier than having to translate it constantly.
Well, I remember the intro song from back then, and I think they sang Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
No, they sang Hero Turtles. Yeah, they sang Hero Turtles.
The ninja is so stuck in my head.
Well, it's just because in the later iterations, they didn't do that anymore. But back here in 1990, that's how they had to do it.
Okay, fair enough.
And it's hard to really imagine how big this was when it hit in the U.S. It was like lightning struck. And to really, a little bit of the idea of how big this was can be seen in the current Netflix series, The Toys That Made Us. They have an episode about Ninja Turtles. Definitely worth watching. But I remember walking to an arcade one day. I knew about Ninja Turtles from some friends of mine in the U.S. And when I was in Argentina and I walked into an arcade and there was the 4-player Konami Ninja Turtles arcade machine. And it was like something we had never seen before. 4 players at the same time, tons of sprites running around. They looked cartoon perfect, even though we didn't know what the cartoon was. I had never seen the cartoon at this point.
But
nobody there had seen the cartoon. But the game played so flawlessly, had so much character. Every stage seemed to bring something new into it that you just kept throwing in quarters to see what was going to come next.
So when you never saw the cartoons before you actually played the game, why were you so hyped for the game?
We weren't hyped for the game. We didn't know it was coming.
Okay.
But when you saw it, it looked like nothing you had seen in the arcades before.
Okay, fair enough.
The animation quality was completely different because remember, most arcade games at this point are still being designed by arcade game makers, which means that they don't have the same level of graphical design aesthetic that the cartoon show had, because the cartoon show was being made by professional designers. So when they took those designs one-to-one over into the arcade game, it suddenly had a feel that no previous arcade game could have had.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, and it didn't hurt that these were designs that were very simplistic in their color schemes. So you didn't have to waste a lot of the limited color palette per sprite on a bunch of shading. And so you could just put it in there.
Well, remind me, when was Dragon Slayer published?
Dragon Slayer is 1983. Not published, released in the arcades.
Released.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is 7 years after Dragon Slayer, but remember, Dragon Slayer wasn't really interactive in that sense.
No, it wasn't, but it was pretty cartoony.
Well, it was a cartoon.
Right.
If you wanted to look for comparable cartoony games prior to this, you've got Popeye from Nintendo that has a very cartoony feel, but it's very, very static. The background is black for the contrast because you have a limited number of colors that the hardware can display. Same reason why Donkey Kong has a black background.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And so forth. And, I mean, if you compared it with other fighting games that were out at the time, things like, for example, Double Dragon, those sprites in Double Dragon, they look janky as hell. I mean, the Double Dragon sprites are not well designed. So yeah, we just took a look at some video of Double Dragon and of Ninja Turtles. And Double Dragon comes out in 87. It's 2 years earlier, but still.
There is a distinguishable difference, recognizable. Does it make sense what I just said?
A recognizable difference or they can be distinguished from one another.
They can be distinguished from one another.
Yes.
You might want to cut this out.
No,
or you just leave it in.
I'm just going to leave it in.
Fair enough.
That's okay. But yeah, so the animation quality, it was just something we had never seen before.
Right.
And
well, you hadn't.
I had, well, I mean, and nobody had seen that in an arcade game before.
Yeah.
Now, the characters, obviously, if you'd watched the cartoon, that was fine, but it changed the game.
Yeah.
And
all the movement of the turtles when they were grappled and whatever.
Exactly. I mean, we had seen grappling moves and stuff before, but you'd never seen it as fluid and beautiful as that. And, I mean, now, granted, you look at it nowadays, you're like, yeah, that's not the best animation in the world.
Yeah, sure.
But at
back
the
in the
time,
day, sure.
It was just earth-shattering. So, yeah, Turtle Mania is coming, and those that, or I should say, those games I mentioned, the home games, the NES, Amiga, DOS, and C64 game, were all the same game design.
Yeah.
That would later get ported to the Amstrad CPC and the Spectrum as well, and be released in Europe. And yeah, it wasn't a great game. I know a lot of people love it. I hate to break it to you all, it was garbage. It was garbage then, it's garbage now, and yeah, all we really wanted was the arcade game at home. But alas, it was not to be. So, okay, but yeah.
Moving on?
Moving on. We've got big news.
Yes, Winter CES brings the games.
That's right. The Winter CES happened. We got big reports. It's going to be partially this month, next month. But Computer Gaming World has their big report. And as they're going through the stages of grief this month, because they suggest that consoles are dying. And they open their report on the Winter CES by saying that PC software getting ported to consoles will give PC game makers the funds to keep making great PC software. So consoles are a good thing?
Yes, because they support the important thing.
Exactly. I mean, it's... I've railed about this a few times now over the last few months, and watching American PC magazines, PC gaming magazines, try to deride consoles at a time when literally the industry is floundering. And consoles are on the rise, and the console games are getting more sophisticated and whatnot. It is, in hindsight, very, very childish and pathetic. And at this point, this idea that, well, you know, maybe if they started making console games, that'll sell enough that they can make these PC games that we really like that aren't really making them any money.
Take the money from the dumb folk to support the important stuff. PC games.
I mean, it's the bargaining stage of grief. And yeah, it's kind of sad. But oh well.
Let's put in some rainbow colors in our PCs and call us gamers.
But hey, they've got their little silver lining. They think they found it, and that is in the first story.
Yes, Nintendo misfires with Dragon Warrior.
Nintendo of America has been stuck with a rumored 2 million Dragon Warrior game cards after the JRPG failed to find a fan base in the US. Nintendo would later give away hundreds of thousands, if not millions of cards for free when people subscribe to the Nintendo Power magazine. Now, that means you get a $50 game for free when you bought a $20 magazine subscription, which boosted the game's profile and led to a growing fan base for JRPGs. Now, Computer Gaming World mentions this in their typical anti-console way, suggesting that this might be a sign that the video game market is softening faster than people thought.
Because
it wasn't.
One game was a flop, and the entire market is going down. Yes, baby.
Yeah. Dragon Warrior ET was not. Dragon Warrior was an attempt to bring this style of game to the U.S. They made a ton of changes to it. The translation was the translation.
That existed, okay.
It was maybe just a little too early. It was a little too different from everything else. But...
So what was the big difference that scared away US customers?
It was just a type of game that they weren't familiar with.
Okay.
You have to remember that the people playing console games at this point, and CGW does recognize this quite accurately, they were primarily kids playing action games. And the Dragon Quest game was Dragon Warrior. Sorry, with Dragon Quest in Japan, Dragon Warrior in the US. They changed the name. So the Dragon Quest game was supposed to bring in a slightly older audience and introduce kids to this idea of the action RPG or the JRPG. Sorry, not action RPG, the JRPG. The way Zelda had brought in the action RPG.
Okay.
That had been a huge success. Why not do the same thing now with this game where you have a little bit more in the vein of statistics and things like that happening? And unfortunately, it just wasn't going to meld. And the traditional computer role-playing people, the people playing Dungeons and Dragons and so forth, I don't think they recognized this as being in the same vein as the games that they were familiar with. And that's why it just kind of failed. And Nintendo had brought it over at their own expense. It didn't go through a third-party publisher. They had put a lot of money into this, and that's why they were sitting on the carts and could also get rid of them through the subscription to Nintendo Power Magazine, which was their in-house, basically an advertisement for more Nintendo games.
Just for lack of my understanding, you couldn't just rewrite the cards and put some other label on them.
No, once you burn those ROMs, you burnt those ROM chips. That's it. The chip is burnt with that. It's not a rewritable medium at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, this is not like an SD card. You burnt this ROM, those pathways are on the metal, and that's it.
Okay.
Yeah. So you either sell it or you trash it, but you don't have another option.
Well, you can give it away for a mega subscription.
Exactly, which is what they did. Yeah. So, but let's take a look at what might save the PC gaming industry.
Whew. VGA will save us from 16-bit consoles.
The advent of VGA graphics at the show, including VGA upgrades of existing titles such as Silent Service from Microprose, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and Battle Chess, in addition to a slew of new games, all supporting 256 colors, should, according to CGW, be the future of PC video gaming. And the future of PC gaming video is clear. So,
well,
VGA
was used, so...
Well, yeah, no, VGA was coming. It was great. Yeah. And a VGA card cost you as much as a console.
Well, today for a up-to-date graphic cards, you get like 2 consoles, so...
This is true, and it hasn't gotten any better. So, yeah. But this was the transition that was needed. I mean, remember, we've talked about this last year that the Commodore 64 was basically the last alternative on the U.S. market to PC compatibles. That is essentially dead now because there's no software coming in for it. There's no other barrier you can push the machine to. We talked about how Project Firestart, the greatest Commodore 64 game of all time, and I will not accept any argumentation to the contrary on this, was pushing the hardware to its limits. The loading times were absolutely horrendous with the disk drive. There was nothing else you could do there, and the PC had to get out of the EGA rut.
Yeah.
16 color graphics were not going to ever make that worthwhile. The advent of VGA and its spread is going to make many games that are going to actually push that boundary possible probably the biggest one going to be Wing Commander in not too long of a future.
You know, I really do not get the concept of a console and PC war, and also not the concept of the entire PC master race, you know. It's like, guys, can you just accept that other people, for whatever reason, support other platforms?
It was the
it's like
issue.
Such a non-topic to be bitching about.
Well, yes and no, but you have to remember the PC market. When we look at the games that I just listed, Silent Service, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and Battle Chess.
Yeah.
None of these are fast action games.
No.
One of them is a fairly complex simulation of World War II submarine warfare. The other one is a point-and-click adventure game.
Yeah.
With a couple little action bits, but yeah, point-and-click adventure game. And the last one is chess.
Yeah.
Well animated, but it's chess.
Exactly.
These are not games that... and even though Silent Service and I believe Battle Chess both get console ports at some point, they're not the type of game that's going to be on a console.
And this is why I don't buy a console when I like to play those kind of games. And I'm not bitching about the other people buying consoles for like action RPGs or whatnot, you know?
Well, yeah, but this is the whole thing. They're dumbing us down. But remember, it's coming at the cost of developers making more of this type of game. Developers are going to stop making this kind of game in order to sell those action-y titles. Remember, Microprose, the makers of Silent Service, just announced a couple months ago that they're importing a bunch of action games for the Commodore 64 from Europe, like Nebulous.
Yeah.
So this is really a conflict for them of, well, what are we going to play? Who's going to develop for us if the money's on the console and you can't sell a complex game on the console?
Well, then you would rather like be bitching about your education system, and you know, I mean, if the people want to buy Battle Chess because we are all so into it being chess players, then surely they'll develop Battle Chess 3, the Fighting of the Queen or whatever. You know?
But it's just, this is the argument that they see, and this is how they see the industry abandoning the PC, and this is also why they have to upgrade the tech. The PC has to be more impressive. Nobody's ever going to tell you Wing Commander is a deep, philosophical, or strategically taxing game.
Yeah.
It's a fun, big, explodey action game with amazing graphics and theatrical scenarios around it. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of game that is only going to be possible on VGA in a proper way. Anybody who's played the Amiga version that basically looks like EGA will know what I'm talking about. And it's really a game that should have or could have almost been a console game had the tech allowed it to be. And it did get a port to the Super Nintendo. It did get ported later on to the 3DO, and the sequels got onto the PlayStation. Mm-hmm. But it's not the kind of game that they're actually fighting to save here, but it will be heralded as the great savior of the PC later on. So, okay, but now we've got VGA. It's a clear standard. Everybody knows what they're doing. What about sound?
Listen to the next top?
Yes.
Damn it, man.
Oh, you beat me to it. That was so nice. That was much better than what I came up with. Okay, sorry. Go for it.
Anyhow, sound is a bit trickier.
At the Winter CES, there's still no clear path forward for PC-compatible sound. We talked about Access Software's Real Sound system back in our October 2019 ep, and CinemaWare and Data East have joined the fray for digitized speech through the PC speaker game with RealTalk and AFB sound system respectively, the latter of which will apparently eat up less RAM than Access's solution. None of these would make much of a splash in the market as sound cards are on the rise, but developers are still bemoaning the fact that they have no idea which way this whole thing will go and don't know which standards to support. And, I mean, this is something very similar to what we would see 15 years later with 3D cards. where nobody knew which standard to support. And all these attempts to try to get... Well, no, well, 10 years later. 10, 12 years 2000. Later. 2002, 2003 is when we really get those battles. Well, 2000. No, 2000. You're right, 2000. So what's really happening here is that a few people are still trying to make do with the PC speaker.
Yeah.
But which card are you going to take? Nobody's got a clue yet. There's the Sound Blaster, there's the Ad-Lib, there's the Roland, and a dozen other smaller cards out there fighting for dominance. We're going to get some external solutions. I believe the Sound Source is one of them. Disney's got their own external sound card support. It's insane.
Isn't it interesting that at least around the people that I know, no one really talks about the sound card anymore, and when you try to buy a new PC, the last thing you have a look at is the sound specs?
Of course not. Just like when was the last time you looked at the 2D specs on your video card?
Honestly, I've never looked at the 2D specs of my video card.
My point exactly. Because these things have just become so superfluous and the standards are so straightforward that it's not really necessary anymore. And that's where the evolution, the hardware has basically hit a limit where it doesn't really matter.
No, it really
tiny
doesn't.
little differences, and the APIs have really made a difference here. I mean, nobody really has to worry about memory allocation and worrying about IRQ conflicts on a DOS or Windows machine anymore. So but this is this phase when the PC is finally going to become a gaming rig, even though Computer Gaming World has been trying to tell us that it's a gaming rig for years, and except for some Sierra adventures, it's not. But oh well. Okay, and speaking about big and illustrious games,
CinemaWare announces TG16 version of It Came from the Desert.
Now, desert. It came for dessert. No, it came from the dessert. You think you're eating a piece of cake and it's crawling out of there.
And there it is. It is there.
Yes.
Told you.
Now, this announcement is interesting as the game's original Amiga version was released back in late 1989 and had originally been thought to be hardware agnostic. So in March, Bob Jacobs, founder of CinemaWare, would announce that NEC, makers of the PC Engine / TurboGrafx-16, had bought a 20% share of the company and a seat on the company's board of directors, and that the game would now be a TurboGrafx-16 CD exclusive. But here they are, already announcing that at Winter CES, probably already knowing that this was the case. So, and I probably wrote this poorly, so I'm going to try to recap.
Yes,
so,
please.
Anybody who's played it, It Came from the Desert was one of the greatest CinemaWare games. It's really where all the elements came together. It's a take on 1950s giant bug B movies, mainly the movie Them, which is amazing. If you haven't seen it, watch Them. And this was, of course, a standard 2D bitmap, hand-drawn graphic game, some action scenes, and it was a persistent world. Depending on where you were, you'd experience different things. You could play through it in different ways.
And it was, like, time-sensitive, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was persistent world. So at 3 o'clock on Tuesday, the miner would come by your house. If you were there, you'd meet him. If you weren't there, you wouldn't meet him, but you'd be someplace else doing something else.
Yeah.
Type of thing. And
pretty cool, actually.
Actually very, very cool, and it gave you a lot of replay value. I mean, I've spent a lot of time on that game. And so the idea here was that they were going to do a CD version. So real actors dressed in costumes, blah, 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 blah. And everybody thought this was going to come out on all the platforms that had CD capabilities. But they're announcing that it's actually going to be a TurboGrafx-16 exclusive. And while they're doing this, even though we won't find out until March that NEC, the parent company making the TurboGrafx, had bought 20% of CinemaWare. The story goes, as I've read it in interviews and so forth, is that CinemaWare was basically on the cusp of bankruptcy. They didn't really have enough cash flow because they had stayed with the Amiga too long, and they desperately needed this extra money in order to complete the project, and that meant that they had to give an exclusive deal for this game to the TurboGrafx. And unfortunately, the TurboGrafx 16 CD is going to be an utter failure in the United States, and so the number of units sold is not going to make up the money, the investment money that they got. Sad but true.
They should have done a time exclusive.
Yeah, but that concept didn't even exist really back then.
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, and you didn't really have that many CD-based systems. The Sega CD is sort of on the horizon. Everybody knows it's coming, maybe, but like so many other Genesis/Mega Drive peripherals, like for example the modem, it just didn't materialize. So you couldn't really do that, and the PC CD-ROM based gaming is in its infancy. They did release Defender of the Crown on CD, but it was a very, very limited version. So, I mean, it made kind of sense at the time, but at the same time, it hampered them. And let's face it, the game wasn't all that good to begin with. So, go figure. And in other home computing news,
yes, New World Computing has shipped Nuclear War.
Okay, now this isn't our normal type of news, but since it's one of my all-time favorite games, I thought it was worth a mention.
And I've just mentioned it.
There, thank you. For those of you not in the know, Nuclear War is a turn-based strategy game about nuclear apocalypse based on the card game of the same name. The computer version used caricatures of various world leaders and had a super dark sense of humor. The artwork by Avril Harrison, who also did art for The Secret of Monkey Island 1 and 2, Loom, and Prince of Persia, is spectacular to say nothing of the iconic Tutankhamun mask image that was the hallmark of the Deluxe Paint software package. Also, she was the model for Elaine Marley in Monkey Island 1's close-up shots. So, amazing artwork. It was a super fun game, and it's something that I actually still play occasionally because you can get through an entire game in under 20 minutes. Sometimes even less than 12, depending on how you're playing. And it's just turn-based. You know, am I going to build weapons? Am I going to prepare a rocket for launch? Am I going to deploy a defensive system? Am I going to bombard my enemies with propaganda? You never know what you're going to do, and you've got 4 computer AI enemies and yourself battling it out on the map. It's a fun game. You should definitely need to play it. So, okay.
It's a fun game.
Yeah.
Moving on.
And it gives us an excuse to talk about Avril Harrison, which is always fun. There's a great link to some of her artwork in the show notes. So please check it out.
In other news, Software Toolworks buys Mindscape.
The successful makers of Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing and Chessmaster are looking to get into NES publishing, so they have purchased Mindscape, the makers of games such as Deja Vu and Balance of Power. This is their second major acquisition in the games market after acquiring IntelliCreations, the successor firm to Datasoft, creators of classics such as Bruce Lee, Alternate Reality, The Goonies, and Zorro for classic 8-bit micro machines.
So what kind of games came out of this takeover?
Basically, mostly just a few ports of existing titles. Deja Vu, for example, and so forth. But this whole thing doesn't really lead to anything too huge, as Software Toolworks was never really a developer of software, and they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do with any of the properties that they've got.
Wonderful, well thought out takeover. Yeah,
but it is interesting. It's another one of these PC companies, old. Established ones trying to get a piece of this NES pie. Unfortunately, the Genesis just came out. The Super Nintendo is around the corner. It's a little too little. Too late. Yeah. Oh well.
There's way more brain in the PC market. anyhow, Michael Cranford leaves Interplay.
The creator of the first two Bard's Tale games has left Interplay to develop Centauri Alliance for Broderbund. We just talked about
that.
Yeah. This luminary would not work on Bard's Tale 3 or its spiritual successor Dragon Wars. Cranford would later co-design Darkseid before leaving the game industry to pursue an academic career focused on the ethics of technology. Today he runs a software development firm.
What are they developing?
To be honest with you, I don't know, but I did include a link to his LinkedIn page, so you can check it out there.
And tell us.
Yes. But no, Cranford is important because Bard's Tale really is a revolutionary product when it comes out. Not because that type of game didn't exist before. We had Wizardry before that. We had Ultima before that. But what it did was it added a visual element.
Yeah.
Graphical quality to these 3D worlds, this move one block at a time, 90-degree angle 3D world. And it was the first of those games available on the Commodore 64.
Huh. Okay.
Which comes out just at the time when the Commodore 64 is becoming the most prominent computer. It hits just at the time when companies like Surtech, the publishers of Wizardry, aren't paying attention to that system. And it becomes a massive success and sets up Interplay and Electronic Arts in that market in a big way. So he's important to the evolution. Centauri Alliance is a very, very ambitious game that never really gels. And Darkseid is a point-and-click adventure game with artwork created and designed by H.R. Giger, the guy who developed the Aliens designs. So it's a really creepy-ass game. And worth a look.
It's called Darkseid.
Yes. So there you go. Okay.
There you go.
And now moving over to Europe.
Yes, Domark goes 3D.
UK publisher Domark, famous for Star Wars and James Bond licensed games, has become the publisher of Incentive Software's Freescape engine-based games. The first title they'll publish will be Castle Master. Now, the Freescape engine, I believe we may have mentioned it once or twice before, was an innovative first-person 3D engine using filled polygons. So you actually move through the world. Now, these were very, very simplistic-looking 3D worlds, but they were actual adventure games in a 3D world. So you'd move through, you'd have to pick up items, take them someplace else. The idea of moving through the environment was very, very cool. And Domark would not only publish Castle Master, but they would also end up publishing the 3D construction kit, which was basically a user-editable version of the Freescape engine.
Oh, okay.
So you could make your own 3D models and set up your own games with your own triggers and things like that.
This is pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was pretty good, and it's kind of sad that they didn't keep pursuing this as the machines got stronger. I mean, we see that the PC is right around the corner. The software does get released on DOS.
Yeah.
If you had had another couple of iterations of that, you really could have created far more complex games in that 3D environment, which are starting to show up. We're starting to see Dynamics has already released Die Hard, which was in a fully 3D environment. They've just released their Spy game, which was also using 3D graphics. There was this need for this, and Domark has the technology, and somehow they don't move it past the Amiga and Atari ST, which were not machines that were really well suited to that kind of graphics. But oh well. It's fun.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the reasons, we just talked about all those really good companies who had really nice products, and they just, there was just so much missing to them actually being successful, and they were just, I don't know any Domark games or anything Domark related anymore from the time that I...
Yeah, Domark wasn't really a player. Well, Domark doesn't really disappear. They were purchased by Eidos Interactive, and then Eidos Interactive was taken over by Square Enix. So essentially, there's a remnant of Domark still out there someplace.
Yeah, some of the stuff surely is still in the industry.
There's some DNA of Domark still out there. And, I mean, it was a company that did some interesting stuff. The James Bond licensed games, some of them were really good. Some of them really were not good. But it was a company that at least wasn't just doing nothing but arcade ports, even though they did plenty of those, and most were not very good. But yeah, so it was an interesting little company, and they got bought up, and like I said, their DNA is still out there, but it's not an independent company anymore.
Well, leaving its traces in the industry.
Yes.
Anyway, Magnetic Scrolls signs up with Virgin Mastertronic.
Acclaimed text adventure creators Magnetic Scrolls, famous for The Pawn, have signed a new publishing deal with Virgin Mastertronic with the promise that they have a new game engine that will offer modern gamers what they want from an adventure game.
And?
They didn't.
Okay.
The game that they brought out was called Wonderland.
Wonderland.
Which was basically Alice in Wonderland.
Mm-hmm. As a text adventure?
Sort of. It was a text adventure with still images. And Magnetic Scrolls was always known for these really amazing still images. The Pawn, the graphics on The Pawn were just phenomenal for their time.
As a still image?
As a still image.
Okay.
The only problem is that they went from a type-in text parser to a point-and-click text parser, but there were still so many options. It wasn't pared down like the LucasArts Scum engine, which was just move, pick up, drop, use, blah, blah, blah. There were so many different options that it became a chore to try to put together the sentences. And
what the hell do you mean, developer? What do you mean?
And let's face it, Wonderland, it was kind of a bad choice for a scenario.
It's a little bit girly.
Well, no, that's not necessarily the problem.
Sorry to all the girls out there who like gaming.
Although, now that you mention it, the artwork that they chose for the cover was this picture of a really, really angry Mad Hatter and the rabbit. So there's actually no female characters. Well, they were trying to make it like an adult version of the Alice story, which has been done again and again. Years later, we get American McGee's Alice and so forth. But the problem is, if you're building a game where it's supposed to be built off of logical puzzles, Wonderland is not the game for you. Because nothing in Wonderland, the whole point of the book is that nothing makes sense.
Yeah.
So don't build an adventure game in a world where nothing makes sense.
Well, maybe they wanted to have a large amount of freedom.
That's just going to be confusing. I mean, I tried playing the game years ago. I didn't get very far. It wasn't that it didn't make sense. It just, I didn't get the point.
Oh, okay.
I didn't get the point of it's similar to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which I played after seeing the movie.
Yes.
You basically went through the movie. The few things that they added didn't really change anything.
Okay.
Later games like Fate of Atlantis, that was a new original story, that was fun. But if I'm just replaying a story that already exists, and yes, they changed things in Wonderland, blah, 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 the game has a certain cult following, but it was their last game. That was it. It was over. It was done.
I mean, copying existing stories surely works, but then at least the gameplay has to deliver, you know?
Well, the gameplay, in an adventure game, it's all about figuring out what the next move is.
All right, and that doesn't really make sense because you actually know you
know what's supposed to happen next. And if it deviates from the original source material, well then why use the source material?
Exactly.
So, I mean, you can make action games and all sorts of stuff out of this kind of material. Just don't make a point and click or an adventure game because we already know what's going to happen next.
Was it a bad game?
In my opinion, yes, because it was a game that was no longer appropriate for its time.
Okay.
Just like Infocom is dead at this point, and they're trying to innovate the text adventure. You can't. It's dead.
Okay.
We've gone to graphics. We don't need the handicap of text to make the story work.
So, 1 to 10, what grade would you give this game?
At the time of its release, maybe a 4.
Dude, it's not cool to give games bad grades.
Really? Is that leading us into the next story?
It is. It's really not cool to give games bad grades.
Well, the scriptwriter of the game adaptation of Ghostbusters 2, and Anya Uvnoska, wrote a really passive-aggressive letter to Ace Magazine after they gave the game a horrid score. And this one is classic. I mean, when I look through the magazines, I usually just skim over the letter section because there's not all that much interesting there. But sometimes you get a real doozer. And this lady sent this passive-aggressive letter like, well, what do you expect? We only had so little time to work on it, and we didn't have a full script of the movie, and we had to do this, and we had to do that. Okay, now for those who have not played Ghostbusters 2... And here, Ghostbusters 2, we have to be very specific. There's I believe 4 different game designs for this license. There was Ghostbusters 2 for DOS, which was designed by Dynamics, which is a bunch of mini games connected with story blocks. Then there's the NES game, which was an action-y game. I believe there's also a TurboGrafx-16 game, but I may be wrong on that one. And then there is the Activision-created game that got released on the European microcomputers, so Commodore 64, Spectrum, Amstrad, MSX, as well as the 16-bit machines, Atari ST, and Amiga, and there was even an Atari 2600 port of this.
It was a widespread game.
It was a very widespread game, but remember, Ghostbusters 2, yes, Ghostbusters 2 was an extremely anticipated movie. I mean, we're talking 5 or 6 years after Ghostbusters, one of the biggest films of all time, and everybody was just biting at the bit. They wanted this movie, and the movie disappointed on many, many levels.
Yeah.
And the game, to be all honest, this Activision title was garbage. Oh my God, was it bad. It was an uncontrollable mess. It consisted of 3 different stages, completely different setups in each stage. Most people never got past the first section of the first level because it was so damn hard. I mean, on the Commodore 64, I tried, and then I used cheats. And I kind of got a little bit further, and I still was failing miserably.
All right, I'm invincible, but I'm still failing.
And, Ace ripped the game a new one, and it was well-deserved. And this woman is just taking it very, very personally. And just reading this letter again, links in the description below. It's not a good look. It's not a good look that she puts on here. But, that happened.
Well, maybe they should have added zombies, because everything is better with zombies.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
I'm on fire. French zombies are coming. And not even, guys, to be honest, I'm not even prepared. I do not really know what comes up next.
Don't tell people you're not prepared. Okay.
No. Let me be honest, at least this once.
Okay. French developer/publisher Ubisoft announces that they will finally release their original first title from way back in 1986, Zombie, that's Zombi, in the UK and the rest of Europe. The game, which was originally only released on the Amstrad CPC, is an adventure title loosely based on the classic Romero movie Dawn of the Dead. Now, this I mentioned for 2 reasons. Number 1, Zombie, important milestone because it's the beginning of Ubisoft.
Yeah.
And also a wonderful sign that nobody was really checking licensing back then. And second is that they would revive this property of Zombie for the Wii U years later. One of the only adult, and I put that in quotation marks, styled games at launch for the Wii U was this Ubisoft title, Zombie. It's been ported to a couple of other systems since then. And the innovative part about it was that you had all these different characters in some kind of bunker, and each one would be sent out to try to gather stuff for the bunker, and every time one of them died, it was basically permadeath, and you would then have to take over a new character, and you could pick up the stuff from the body of the last character and things like that.
That's pretty cool.
It looked pretty cool. I never really got to play it because it never had a Wii U, because nobody had a Wii U, or very few people had a Wii U, and it did get some ports later on to other systems, but that Zombie U game, as it was called, had it start here.
U.
Yeah. And it was spelled ZOMBI.
And U.
And a U. And that's what they were taking off. They were picking up on this original license.
Well, maybe there's going to be a zombie Switch because they are recycling all the Wii U titles to the Switch.
It wouldn't surprise me if it's been ported to the Switch. Okay, but
I just want to say one thing. Ubisoft and I, we have a special relationship because Ubisoft are the guys that got me into gaming with Rayman. Yes, Rayman.
On which system?
On DOS.
On DOS, okay,
on the DOS
yes,
computer.
the DOS port, yes.
The DOS port, yeah. This was the first big game, well, big. No, it was big, Rayman's
It was huge.
It was the first big game that I've played, and I was so happy that I could play it.
And it was originally an Atari Jaguar exclusive. Timed exclusive. It started out as a Jaguar exclusive and then got ported to everything else under the sun. But no, yes, Rayman was really probably the most successful European platformer. It still had that aesthetic that we had in the 90s in European platformers of massively overly saturated colors and super bright and stuff happening everywhere, and didn't have the cleanliness and easy to distinguish graphics of a Japanese jump and run. But it actually did it in such a way that it still felt good.
No, I really loved it, man. It was so colorful, it was cartoony, and I would play it today. I will play it right now. If you fire it up, I'd play it right now.
I can fire it up, and we need to make a jump anyway, so while we're transferring ourselves to the next decade, I'm going to fire up some Rayman and see what he thinks of it.
Wonderful.
Today. Okay. See you on the other side.
As an industry, video games is bigger than Hollywood.
To electronic launch in history.
Welcome to February 2000. So,
After
what'd you
playing,
think of Rayman?
I love Rayman. I still love it.
Yeah, we didn't play it.
Yeah, but it just went through my memory, and I replayed every moment of it. Every moment.
Good. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So,
how is the pizza dough coming?
The pizza dough is coming. It's rising as we speak.
Not bad.
The
rising of the pizza dough.
The rising of the pizza dough. Yes, I'm making pizza dough as we speak. So, okay. Speaking of other things that blow a lot of hot air and fumes and whatnot, that's a terrible analogy. What's our first story?
Yeah, Sega announces downloadable game service for Dreamcast.
What would become the Dreamcast Library game rental service?
What a name.
Allowed players to rent digital copies of classic Mega Drive and PC Engine titles to be played on the Dreamcast.
And if that's not a system seller, I don't know what is.
Well, I mean, downloadable content was kind of a big deal on the Wii and the Wii U, but yeah, I see what you're saying. It's not really next gen.
No.
Now, Electronic Gaming Monthly reported that the VMU would be used for storing game data, but this would only be used for save game data, while the Dreamcast's internal memory served to store the ROMs, meaning the games would be deleted once you rebooted the system.
Never cut the power.
Yeah, basically. And this is one of the big problems with the Dreamcast. It's a next-gen system that doesn't have enough storage capacity. The PlayStation 2 is going to have a similar issue, and it's going to have its own external hard drive add-on that virtually no games are going to take advantage of. But the moment you want to do something online, you're going to need that hard drive.
Oh, yeah.
This is why if you wanted to play the PlayStation 2 version of EverQuest, you had to have the hard drive add-on. Also, that's where the modem was, but that's another issue entirely. But this is where Xbox has a huge advantage. This is why you can do the multiplayer Halo games and stuff, you've got that hard drive to fall back on. And yeah, so Dreamcast is trying. I mean, we just talked about it last month, how the head of Sega was talking about the hardware-less future. Well, guess what?
Not yet.
Not without a hard drive, you ain't.
Nope.
And so, yeah. But it's interesting. This Stream Library service would get released in Japan. Obviously, never comes to North America, but it's kind of cool that they're trying it. And in other news of people trying stuff...
Nuon to be shown at Winter CES.
The Nuon system is getting close to a market release, and the first big title, Jeff Minter's Tempest 3000, is also nearing completion.
I've never heard either of the Nuon or of Jeff Minter's Tempest 3000.
Well, we talked about the Nuon a few months ago. The Nuon was a basically a GPU solution that could be installed into DVD players. So you would buy the DVD player, it would still have the value of a DVD player, but you could also play select Nuon compatible games on this DVD player. And Nuon was being developed by a company called VM Labs. And VM Labs actually has history through the same companies and a lot of the same people who had also worked on the Atari Jaguar hardware, and before that on the Connex multi-system hardware, and going all the way back to the Sinclair Spectrum.
Okay.
So it's that English tradition of engineering, and Jeff Minter is legendary English game developer, famous for really fast arcadey action games.
Okay.
And he had resuscitated an old Atari IP, Tempest, which was a vector-based shooting game, abstract shooting game from the arcades from the 80s, and he had brought it back on the Jaguar as Tempest 2000. Tempest 3000 was the Nuon updated version.
So, and how would you control the whatever it is on the screen?
With the Nuon, I believe there was a controller for the Nuon, or you just use the DVD remote control, but I am unfortunately undereducated on that point. So yes, I believe there was an extra controller for it, but don't quote me on that.
Okay, I won't.
So, but since they have to license the Nuon technology...
Yes, Samsung announces Xtiva DVD players.
The Samsung Xtiva is a Nuon-based DVD player that, beside normal DVD features, will also have the ability to play games. Now, this is the Nuon technology we were just talking about, and the fact that the player did apparently ship, based on Amazon reviews without the Nuon label, probably didn't help its market performance. It also, according to a Samsung press release, was to retail at $499 in the second half of 2000 in North America, which would place it right up against the October launch of the PlayStation 2 in North America at just $299. And this is really where the idea of the Nuon kind of fails. Yeah. And I'll put a link to this in the show notes. There's a great interview with John Matheson. He was an engineer on the Nuon project and all those other ones I just mentioned. And the idea here was that, well, even if you didn't play the games, you still had the DVD player, so it would still be something of value. And this is where Sony's inclusion of a DVD player in the Sony PlayStation 2 is what kills this generation.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're coming in way below everybody else.
Yeah.
And like I said, I looked on Amazon. I got a link to the Amazon listing in the show notes. There's no labeling on this, at least no visible labeling saying that it's a Nuon machine. There's no advertising that you can play games on this. It just looks like a regular DVD player. And it's costing $200 more than the PlayStation 2. So had the Nuon technology come out, let's say 2 years earlier, when DVD was still very, very new, when there was nobody else on the horizon who's going to be doing fast 3D games with a DVD player, this would have been brilliant. Coming out at the same time as the PlayStation 2, suicide, unfortunately. It's too little too late. It's an interesting idea, but it's not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting idea, but for me it's like, you have this in-between technology. You still have the old technology, and you have this new technology, and then you want to put this new part on the old part.
Well, and not only that, but remember, Sony isn't really paying a DVD license.
Yeah, I know why they're saving money.
That changes it. That's
Sure.
a huge chunk of change that they're saving on the manufacturing costs.
Right, but the new one is not as powerful as the PS2 is.
Yes,
I
but
think.
Sony is making money off of every game sold.
Yeah.
New One is making money off of every game sold. But Samsung isn't going to be making money off of every game sold. So Samsung has to sell this at a profitable cost.
Right.
Sony doesn't.
Right.
Sony can sell at a loss.
Right.
Or just at the margin. And still make the money back later on the game.
Oh, yeah, sure.
That's why Samsung has to sell at this much higher price.
Yeah, I know, but still, also the hardware isn't as potent as the PS2 anyways.
No, but the New One hardware was impressive. It was an impressive 3D engine. I mean, it wasn't PlayStation 2, by no means.
All right.
But at the time they're conceiving it with the low cost, and this is that tradition of the English, ours isn't as powerful, but hey, we're doing it cheap, of the Sinclair Spectrum and these other systems. They weren't ready for a company like Sony, with the resources of a company like Sony coming into the video game market. Remember, up until this point, you've got the Segas and Nintendos of this world, which basically are flies in comparison with the elephant that is Sony. The company infrastructure you need to be making televisions and movies and Walkmans and all this other mass appeal commercial goods dwarfs what the console makers can do. And Sony's entrance into the market took everybody by surprise. There was no way anybody else was going to be able to compete on price until Microsoft shows up. It takes these two massive international companies to even make a dent, and this is also one of the reasons why Nintendo doesn't even try to compete on technology anymore.
Well, makes sense.
Yeah, because they can't. There's no point. They can compete on IP. They can compete on game design. They can compete on innovative mechanics.
And on names.
Like the Wiimote. Well, that's the IP, the intellectual property. But they can't compete on tech.
Yeah.
But, okay, so that's the new one. And speaking of the imminent PS2 launch...
Yes, Merrill Lynch predicts big things for PS2.
5 years after the launch of the original PSX, investment bank Merrill Lynch has released a report estimating that Sony will sell 100 million PS2s by 2004. This lofty number is in large part due to the machine's ability to play DVDs, expanding its base beyond traditional gamers. Merrill Lynch was almost on the money, with 85 million units being sold worldwide by the end of 2004, but a total of 158 million would be sold by the time the system was discontinued in 2013. So not only does the system have an extremely long lifespan, but it sells numbers that nobody had ever seen before.
I'm just thinking, have we seen those numbers ever since?
That is an excellent question.
I think PS2
on a sit-down
is
console,
the leader.
I could be. One moment. Okay, and we just looked up the most current numbers we could find, January 2020, and yes, the PS2 is still the leader. The Nintendo DS is right behind it, but the DS is a handheld. We can't really put it in the same category as a sit-down console. No. The next best-selling one would be the PlayStation 4 with 106 million, and then the PlayStation, the original one, with 103 million, followed by the Nintendo Wii with 102 million. So, yes, this is
Microsoft is really not doing well.
Well, Microsoft, I mean, the 360 actually won that generation. The PlayStation 3 was slightly delayed, but the PlayStation 3 also had a Blu-ray drive in it. So a lot of people just bought it for the Blu-ray drive.
Sure.
But yeah, so this really is, I mean, the PlayStation 2 is a cultural phenomenon, and it still is. I mean, I still have a PlayStation 2 sitting at my parents' place in the States. Yeah, hasn't been turned on in years, but it's still sitting there. So, okay. Speaking of the future...
Yes, Nintendo is sticking to its 2000s release date for the Dolphin.
Despite rumors that software development is still being done on hardware simulators as there are no finalized specs, Nintendo continues to insist that Dolphin, later renamed GameCube, would be on store shelves worldwide by Christmas of 2000. Sadly, it wouldn't hit until Christmas of 2001 in Japan, and North America and Europe wouldn't get it until May of 2002. And this is one of those situations where, at this point, they're also still talking about GameCube using a DVD drive.
Oh, okay.
And I think that it was probably partially a side effect of them not wanting to pay the licensing fee, partially the side effect of the size of the machine would have been changed instead of using the smaller discs that they ended up using. And they were worried about piracy once DVD burners became very, very popular.
Yeah.
And so they used those tiny little discs that you really couldn't get otherwise to make sure that their system was copy-proof.
They are really afraid of copyright infringement. Piracy.
Well, of course. And this is one of the reasons why the Nintendo 64 was not a disc-based system.
Yeah,
even though it would have massively improved the ability of the system to do larger games like RPGs.
Dude, maybe I'm way too legal, but are there so many pirated PS2 games?
Oh, tremendous number.
And
this
Xbox
is one of the reasons.
360,
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the modding community for those systems was huge. And the number of people who had entire libraries of pirated software for them is not insignificant. No, there was a lot of piracy on those systems. The Dreamcast was notorious for it because they had virtually no protection on the system. They were using the so-called GD-ROMs, but there was at least one brand of CD burners that could copy them without a problem.
Okay.
And also, most of the games didn't take up the full GD-ROM, so people were just basically cracking the games and reducing the size down to something that would fit on a regular CD. Yeah, so
okay.
this was.
Okay, well, interesting. I mean, computers, well, let's say I had a friend who signed up in the library, and when he did, they said, have fun copying the games we have. They said that.
And it's one of those things that shouldn't have happened, but yes, I can definitely imagine it happening. Let's put it that way.
So yeah, PC, okay.
PC is a whole different ballgame. But this is also why the console business is far more profitable than the PC business.
So, right, and the consoles were for me always not... Well, I mean, why not? You just put it in a burner and tell the burner to burn away, right?
No.
With the appropriate software.
Yeah,
with the appropriate software.
It's not that simple.
No, with the appropriate software. But I think my friend also had... Well, moving on. Resident Evil 0 dropped from N64 and moved to Dolphin.
After disappointing sales of the N64 port of Resident Evil 2 and serious space limitations impeding development, Resident Evil 0 has moved to the not yet released Dolphin. And this would be the first of several Resident Evil games that would be launched on the Dolphin, on the GameCube. So Konami actually... Konami. It's Konami, right? Yeah. Not Capcom. No, it's Capcom.
Right, it's Capcom.
Resident Evil is a Capcom property. Oh my goodness, my brain is going. Yes, it's Capcom. Because Jill Valentine shows up in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. So, it's one of several games that gets ported to the GameCube. The GameCube actually gets a couple of Resident Evil games. And, yeah, the attempts to try to pull this off on the Nintendo platforms just wasn't... On the N64, just wasn't going to work. And we're not done with Resident Evil news yet.
We're not. Resident Evil, the ride hits Japan.
Now, this ride, we're going to use ride in quotation marks here. It was basically one of those where you sit down in a cabinet and I guess it rocks occasionally and stuff, and you see this first-person little movie, computer-generated, of a Resident Evil story, a story set in the Resident Evil universe.
Okay.
I got a link to it in the show notes. You can see the whole thing run through. It's not very long. It's called Biohazard 4D. And yeah, it's something that never left Japan, and you haven't really missed much. But yeah, it's
virtual reality is on the rise, dude.
It's it's nothing special. But this was something that would happen from time to time back then. Everybody was trying to turn these things into rides. We talked about it with Stanley Media a few months ago. There was a Street Fighter 2 attempt at a ride. I mean, these things are just. You cannot take an interactive medium like this and turn it into a non-interactive one without losing something, and that's basically what happened.
The interactivity?
It's something like that, yes. Okay.
All right, speaking about losing something.
Exactly.
Hasbro lays off Microprose devs. Microprose.
Yeah, so they worked on microcomputers and they were pros. Micropros. Similar to the mass layoffs at Sierra and Interplay, Hasbro, parent company of Microprose, has laid off hundreds of developers and killed several marquee titles. According to German magazine PC Player, Gunship, B-17-2, and M1 Tank Platoon 3 survived, but sadly M1 wouldn't see release. So yes, this is housekeeping. And we see here what we were talking about in the last jump, this idea of the simulation software. It's dying. It doesn't make any financial sense to release this or to put big effort into it.
Well, as long as you're not a farming simulator. I think best-selling game of Germany in 2019.
You're kidding me.
No, I'm not.
Oh my lord. Okay.
Wait,
let's check that out research. Because that would be a fact that I really hope is not true. Well, after an exhaustive search,
it was sold pretty well.
It didn't hit the top 10, but okay, sure, yeah, it sold well.
Most successful Swiss game.
Okay, I'll buy that. Probably most successful.
Only a Swiss game.
Yeah. Probably most sold C64 game of last year because it did include the Commodore 64 version of Farming Simulator on the disc.
Maybe.
So there you go. But neither here nor there. But yes, farming simulators are a thing. Don't ask me why. But I appreciate the fact that everybody's got something.
See? PC Master Race.
Yes, but games like Gunship, B-17, and M1 Tank Platoon, those were those hardcore simulations from back in the day that simply don't make any sense for a company like Hasbro that's looking for big money to continue to develop. And this is what they were warning about 10 years earlier. And Microprose was basically the last company still doing this on a big scale. Obviously, we've talked in recent months about how it's coming back, how Bill Steely is back involved with a company that has bought the rights to the name Microprose and is making simulations again. And hey, more power to him. It's just one of those things where the big publishers don't see any hope for it. And speaking of big publishers killing off old formats.
Yeah, Sierra defends itself.
Now, Sierra president, insert name here, I couldn't remember, I couldn't be bothered to look up who it was that week, says much of the ire over firings was misplaced. And those are the firings that we've talked about in the last couple months, Chainsaw Friday and stuff. Was misplaced as Dynamic is still active, check. Babylon 5 was dead, and Middle-earth games are still coming, not check. So basically this was a counter media blitz from Sierra to try to make it not look so bad. And in reality, it was so bad. B5 was dead. They canceled the program, Babylon 5. Dynamic actually is not too active at this point. They're winding the company down. And their Middle-earth license. And remember, this is on the cusp of the Lord of the Rings movies coming out. Everybody knows that's in the wings. They've got the license to do Middle-earth. Not movie-based Middle-earth, but Middle-earth. and they're trying to do an MMO and a couple of other things with it, and none of it will come to fruition. It's all going to fail, sadly. So, yeah, this is post-buyout Sierra just kind of collapsing. Sad. But again, just like the kind lady trying to defend Ghostbusters 2, they're just wrangling against facts that are undisputed.
Facts. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but speaking of Sierra.
Yeah. Codemasters by Sierra Yosemite Studio.
After Black Friday wiped out Sierra's original development site in Oakhurst, California, former British budget software publisher Codemasters has purchased the remnants and taken over much of the staff. The new company, Codemasters Yosemite, would run for over a decade before closing down. And the Yosemite site is basically like this mythical thing in gaming, because Sierra really did show up in this tiny little town and that had no real infrastructure, no technology. They had this giant building built. I believe they were leasing it, but giant building built. And yeah, a lot of magical games came out of that site. Everybody lived on site there.
Well, they had nothing else to do, so...
Yeah, and so it was kind of, I remember reading this story back in the day and being really excited by the fact that there might be something coming out of this studio that has a little bit of that old magic in it. So, yeah, and for the next decade, they kept it alive. I mean, at least as a functioning studio. Didn't have anything to do with the old games, but still, at least it was a functioning studio.
Are there any IPs coming out of this takeover?
Codemasters at this point is pivoting towards car simulators really hard. Even to this day, they're basically the number one name in rally car racing, which, again, is one of those simulator things where if you really want to do it, they've got the product for you.
Okay.
Colin McRae series. But it's never been my cup of tea. I'm more of the action, racing, arcadey type of guys. So the idea
one of those guys CGW was bitching about?
Kinda, yeah. Okay. Although I still enjoyed my RPGs, and I enjoyed playing Gunship back in the day and figuring out what all the controls did. I like my variety. This was...
But you have a life and you need something to relax.
Exactly.
Alrighty, speaking about people not having a life anymore, MMO Mania continues.
Oh, nice transition. Yep. Good job. In light of the success of EverQuest, Variant, the game's maker, is rumored to be developing a Star Wars MMO, while Hasbro is said to be working on a D&D MMO. And both of these games would come to pass. With Star Wars Galaxies being the... MMO, yes, it's not a lot.
Really
it didn't last that long. Yeah. It was set in the period after Return of the Jedi, if I remember correctly. It's not the current MMO, which is Knights of the Old Republic, or based on Knights of the Old Republic. And so, yeah, it didn't last for too long. And the other one. The D&D one was based off of a world that had sort of trains and stuff. No, this was an MMO. Neverwinter Nights wasn't MMO because it wasn't massively multiplayer. It was just multiplayer for small groups.
There was a Neverwinter, or there is a Neverwinter-ish MMO.
Neverwinter-ish, but not Neverwinter Nights. So the D&D MMO they developed was set in Stormreach, which was a setting that sort of added some steampunk elements to D&D. I mean, a lot of people were hoping for something a little bit more classic, like Forgotten Realms or maybe even Greyhawk, but they went with this newish this new Stormreach scenario. Not a huge fan personally, but. What are you going to do about it? And that game was launched in 2006 and is still running. Took quite a while to develop. And you were talking about Neverwinter, which is a new free-to-play MMO.
Yeah.
set in the Forgotten Realms, using the Forgotten Realms license.
Okay.
And that is actually the third game with an online component to have Neverwinter in the title. There was the original Neverwinter Nights, which was an online version of the Gold Box engine from 1991. Then there was Neverwinter Nights 1 and 2 from the early 2000s, which was a small party-based online game. And, yeah. So it's... Yeah, they just keep rehashing all of this. It was Eberron was the name of the world. Stormreach was the name of Dungeons and Dragons Online, or the subtitle for it. But it was the Eberron world that they used. And, yeah, not a big fan. So, oh, well. Okay, so, yeah. Everybody's going for the online RPG, and using big licenses seems to be the way that they want to make all of that work. Will it work out for them? Sort of, yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. It's not going to be the
I mean, it wasn't
biggest
World of
thing.
Warcraft, however, but...
No, it's not going to wow you. Okay.
Good one.
Speaking of companies doing
Trying
stuff.
to wow you.
Yeah, exactly.
Eidos buys 51% stake in Iron Storm.
Of course, we can't go a whole month without a
No, we can't.
Daikatana-related story. Another month, another sign that Daikatana is in trouble. According to Eidos' annual report, they are now 51% owners of Ion Storm. Ion Storm, of course, is John Romero's company, the makers
Not
of
anymore, it isn't.
Daikatana. And now it is majority owned by their publisher, Eidos, who is probably freaking out that this is taking so long. And remember, Eidos is the company that has been releasing game after game after game,
Yeah.
most of them quite underwhelming, with the exception of Tomb Raider. And the last Tomb Raider that they released, Tomb Raider 4 at this point, is really getting long in the tooth. Everybody's like, dude, you gotta do something else, and the returns are diminishing.
Oh, yeah.
So they need some big hits, and Ion Storm was supposed to deliver that with Daikatana, and obviously the endless delays and, yeah, basically poor quality of the game at this point is probably stressing them the hell out. They will get Deus Ex out of it, but it's not going to be a game that they can release on console, and is going to be a little too niche. It's going to become legendary, but it's not really going to set the world on fire in sales.
Nope.
So, oh well. And on to bigger and happier news.
The top-selling computer game of Christmas '99 was...
Drum roll, please. Not Quake 3. It was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
I owned a copy of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire German version, and I was really hoping for the German guy who was hosting the show to be the speaker of it, and was just some generic dude. I mean, sorry for you ever recorded the host of the show, but it was just some generic German voice, and it was a little bit
Disappointed?
anticlimactic. Yeah.
Well, I remember the package in the States had Regis Philbin. He was the guy who was hosting the show on the cover. Whether or not he was actually in the game, I can't tell you. I'm guessing he probably was, but I can't tell you that for sure. But yeah, this game was the one that really just killed in Christmas of 1999.
Oh yeah, I think it was around the time that we bought the German version of it.
Well, yeah,
we actually had some fun with it.
It was originally, I believe, an English concept, just like The Weakest Link was originally an English concept. But then it got exported to every corner of the planet with their own national versions.
but them Brits have a whole lot of game shows or reality shows.
Why not? I mean, come on. It's they also gave us Doctor Who, so I'm not complaining.
Oh, no, I'm not complaining at all.
Okay, and...
Roger Wilco brings voice to online gaming.
Roger Wilco, no relation to the Space Quest protagonist, is one of the first voice-over IP solutions hitting the web. The serverless system allows for real-time speech, in particular for online gaming. The SDK powering Roger Wilco would end up getting licensed to all the major publishers of the time, and even be the basis for the voice chat function in Microsoft's Xbox console.
Isn't it funny that things nowadays just work, but back in the day, and it's not even that long ago, things were like, wow.
Well, I remember trying Roger Wilco when they first posted it on the website and chatting with people. And you would just chat with random people just to hear the voice. And you'd be like, oh, this is working. Oh, my God, this is working. Yeah. It was a phenomenal, phenomenal thing. But yes. Now, speaking of other wonderful things on the interwebs.
And speaking of Back to Roots. Back to Roots is trying to make emulation legit.
A nice write-up in PC Player about the efforts of Back to Roots, an Amiga emulation site to get permission from copyright holders to host old Amiga games for download on their site. Now, this one is phenomenal because, as somebody who may or may not have been running a fairly large Amiga website at the time, that may or may not have had links to disk images to download. Back to Roots really was an amazing website. Not only did it host a butt-ton of awesome things from the demo scene, disk images, but they also went out of their way to find legitimate versions of the software, get the permissions from the copyright holders. In many cases, this wasn't all that easy because these companies had been defunct for years. And they were trying to preserve them as best they could. And the website lasted for many, many years. Unfortunately, the hosting costs just spiraled out of control. It was more than they could handle, and the site closed years ago. But it really brought a lot of great stuff to the forefront. And they also managed to save one of the great lost gems of the Amiga scene, which was a game called Amber Moon. And Amber Moon was the second in a series of RPGs from German studio Thalion. And this game had been reviewed in all the major magazines outside of Germany. Now, inside Germany, it was released in German. But the English version had been reviewed by English magazines, but never hit the store shelves because the Amiga was dying at the time and the publishers backed out. And it had essentially a Wolfenstein-style 3D movement engine running on an Amiga 500, which was impressive. It was giant game worlds. It was an impressive game. And I remember even trying to start my own translation project for it for a few months. With a hex editor. Yeah, that was going to work out real well for an RPG. And then Back to the Roots were the ones who, I believe they were the ones who who contacted the copyright holders and actually got the English version, and that got distributed on the web and can be found on many places now. So, from an emulation standpoint, from a gaming history standpoint, and especially from an Amiga standpoint, Back to Roots, extremely important website that deserves to be honored, and I'm glad that this write-up in the magazine was there. So, yeah. And last but not least, talking about our roots.
Our roots. Some things stay, some things leave.
Yeah, exactly.
Tim Schafer leaves LucasArts.
Tim Schafer, designer of Day of the Tentacle, Full Throttle, and Grim Fandango, has left LucasArts. He is one of many designers that has left the company as it shifts from adventure games to Star Wars licensed products. At press time, no one knew what he would do next, but behind the scenes he was already helping found Double Fine Productions, which would give us classics like Psychonauts, Brutal Legend, Costume Quest, and one of my personal favorites, Headlander. So, yes, Tim Schafer, absolute fucking genius. Somebody whose contributions to the medium cannot be overstated. And if you want your game to have a good sense of humor, if you just want to laugh a little bit while you're playing, Tim Schafer's the name of the game. So yes, it's sad that he had to leave LucasArts, and it's sad that LucasArts devolved into a
Star Wars company
with the occasional pretty terrible Indiana Jones license thrown on top. But yeah, bigger and better things, and Double Fine Productions is, for my money, still one of the better publishers out there today.
Yeah, and it leaves him way more leeway to do whatever he wants.
Pretty much, yes.
For instance, if he wants to do an interview with us and listens to us, Tim Schafer, you're welcome to contact us.
I would love to have an interview with Tim Schafer, but we have been concentrating our interviews more on the lesser interviewed people, the people who haven't been interviewed 1,000 times already.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And
still.
So, yes. We're, okay, I started out with Al Lowe, who's been interviewed 1,000,000 times, but...
Yeah.
I got some new stuff out of him, so that was good.
So you might want to get some new stuff out of Tim Schafer.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, I've already got the next 3 interviews in the pipeline, so we'll see what comes of that. So I can't say who they are yet because they haven't been completed yet. But
so you asked them, but they haven't answered yet.
2 of them have already answered.
Oh, wonderful!
One of them I've already done the first half of the interview. And the other one is sort of hanging out there, and I'm gonna keep needling him until I get him. So yeah,
all right,
should be fun. But yeah, that's all there is to it. Okay, so with that being said, that's the end of our time travel this month. So
this is how it ends today.
This is how it ends. We don't have a company going broke this time.
This is not bad.
No, it actually feels good.
I think
it feels good. We actually start with the birth of a company this time. There's hope on the horizon. I mean, otherwise they'll all go broke and we won't have anything to do in the future episodes.
That's true.
So, at this point, I'd just like to say, remember all the stuff we talked about. There's links to all the sources in the description of the episode. If you have any comments, please leave them on your podcast server of choice. Give us a thumbs up, a rating, whatever you can. Over on YouTube, you can also give us a thumbs up there. We post all the episodes with really nice artwork. So if you want to see little images of most of the stories that we've talked about, it's always posted there. I really appreciate it if somebody gave me a compliment on that from time to time.
I mean, it puts a whole lot of work into it.
I do.
So you get a thumbs for me, man.
I'm begging for compliments. Yeah. This is how sad this has got. Also, we've got the Twitter feed. Yeah. So check us out there if you want to send us a message, say hi, give us a follow. That's always cool. In addition to that, we'd like to thank our Patreons. All of you guys are awesome. We appreciate the help. It really helps deal with the costs of hosting all this stuff because it does come out of our pocket because we don't have enough listeners yet to get advertising. And anything else?
No, I just want to thank you all for listening up to this point.
Exactly. And if you did, the secret word is turn up. But you didn't hear it from me. Or something.
You should just cut right after the secret word, for more effect.
Too late for that. I'm too lazy to cut this out. Okay, so
wonderful. Just leave this in.
See you guys next month and have fun.
Have fun.